Rylan Quell was not having a good day. Not that most days in the vacuum of space were particularly pleasant, but today was shaping up to be a real winner. His ship, the aptly named Regretful Decision, was hurtling towards what some overpaid academic back on Earth called a space cathedral. An ancient, alien relic floating precariously around a neutron star like a drunk uncle trying to find his way home after a night at the pub. Just once, I'd like to find an ancient alien relic that isn't orbiting something that could vaporize us into cosmic confetti, Rylan muttered, his voice heavy with sarcasm. His second-in-command, a wiry engineer named Snipe, gave a snort. Where's the fun in that? If it ain't dangerous, it ain't worth our time. Rylan cast a quick glance at the navigation screen, the swirling chaos of space making him feel slightly queasy. Or our lives, he added dryly. Their mission was simple: get in, grab whatever alien gizmo promised to turn the tide in the ongoing war, and get out before the neutron star decided to throw a tantrum. Easy, right? "Captain, we got a problem," said Leela, the ship's pilot, her voice crackling through the comms. "Of course we do," Rylan replied, rolling his eyes. "Because why not? What's it this time? Ship's sensors are picking up some anomalies," Leela said. "Like the kind of anomalies that make your hair stand on end and your breakfast reconsider its life choices." Rylan sighed. "Anomalies, huh? That's just science speak for we're screwed, right?" Leela chuckled, though there was an edge to it. "Pretty much." The crew of the Regretful Decision was a ragtag bunch, the kind you'd expect to find in a spacefaring mercenary outfit. They were irreverent, sarcastic, and had the kind of camaraderie that only formed when your life depended on the person next to you not screwing up. "All right, people," Rylan said, addressing the crew through the ship's intercom. "We're about to make history, or die trying. Probably both." The space cathedral loomed ahead, a massive construct of alien architecture. It looked like something a mad god might have doodled during a particularly boring eternity. "Huh," Snipe said, peering at the screen. "Looks like my mother-in-law's place." "I thought you liked your mother-in-law," Rylan said, feigning surprise. "I do. That's why I'm here and not there," Snipe replied, grinning. "Besides, this thing's got more spikes." As they approached, the ship's scanners began to whir and beep in protest, as if they too wanted no part in this suicidal escapade. "Leela," Rylan called out, "get us in close but not too close." "I like my atoms where they are, thank you very much." "Roger that," Leela replied, her tone brisk with concentration. "I'll try not to smear us across the nearest black hole." The ship maneuvered with surprising grace for something held together by duct tape and sheer stubbornness. Rylan watched the cathedral's silhouette grow larger, its alien design both mesmerizing and unnerving. "You know," Snipe mused, "if we actually pull this off, we might get rich enough to finally retire on a nice planet." "And do what? Start a farm?" Rylan laughed. "We'd last a week before getting bored and raiding the neighbors." The crew focused as the cathedral drew nearer, their joking demeanor slipping away like a cheap disguise. Whatever was in there could be the key to ending a war that had dragged on longer than anyone cared to remember. "Look at it this way," Rylan said. "If we die, at least it'll be a quick death. Vaporized just like that could be worse." "Yeah," Snipe agreed. "Could be slow and painful, like listening to your jokes." "Ha ha," Rylan said dryly. "You should try stand-up." In a black hole, the tension in the cockpit was palpable as Leela guided the ship into position. They all knew the risks, but they'd faced worse odds before, probably. The mission was simple, but Rylan had a nagging feeling in his gut. The kind that said this was going to be anything but. "All right, team," Rylan called out. "Time to earn our paychecks. Lock and load, and let's get this over with before I have to start worrying about the ship's warranty." They geared up, donning worn-out space suits that had seen better days. Snipe checked the seals, cracking one of his perpetual jokes. "These things leak more than a gossip at a funeral." "Comforting," Rylan said, pulling on his helmet. "Let's hope the aliens were kind enough to install some air conditioning." The airlock opened with a hiss that echoed ominously. They floated into the void, tethered to the ship like umbilical cords linking them to their mortality. The cathedral loomed, an impossible structure that defied reason and gravity. "Watch your step, boys and girls," Ryland said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Don't want to trip and fall into an alternate dimension." They made their way to the cathedral's entrance, a gaping maw of darkness. It beckoned with the promise of riches and the threat of annihilation, a typical Monday. "So, what's the plan, boss?" Leela asked, though she already knew the answer. "We go in, grab the tech, and get the hell out," Ryland said, "and try not to die." "It's a flexible plan." "You mean the usual?" Snipe quipped, his voice laced with humor and a bit of dread. "Exactly," Ryland said, stepping into the darkness of the cathedral. "Let's go make history, folks." The interior was cavernous, vast spaces filled with alien technology that hummed and glowed with an eerie light. The architecture was a nightmare of angles and curves, as if the builders had decided to ignore every rule of structural integrity. "Place gives me the creeps," Leela said, scanning the surroundings. "Feels like it's watching us." "If it's watching, I hope it's impressed," Ryland said, trying to lighten the mood. "Last thing we need is an alien Yelp review." They moved cautiously through the labyrinthine corridors, every shadow a potential threat. The air was thick with the promise of violence, and they were just reckless enough to embrace it. "Hey, Ryland," Snipe said, his voice echoing slightly. "Ever think about what you'd do if you weren't a mercenary?" "Me," Ryland smirked. "I'd open a bakery. Sell cupcakes and cookies." "Yeah, right," Leela snorted. "You'd eat all the profits." "True," Ryland admitted. "But at least I'd die happy." They reached a chamber that seemed important, though deciphering alien architecture was not exactly their forte. In the center stood a pedestal, atop which sat a device that looked like the love child of a Rubik's Cube and a blender. "That the tech?" Snipe asked, eyeing the contraption skeptically. "Looks like it," Ryland said. "Let's hope it's not a self-destruct button." As they approached, the device began to hum, a low vibration that tickled at the edges of their sanity. Ryland reached out, feeling a mix of dread and exhilaration. This was it. The moment they either became heroes or cosmic debris. "All right, people," he said, his hand hovering over the device. "On three. 1, 2. A sudden jolt shook the cathedral, throwing them off balance. The device started to glow ominously, casting strange shadows that danced around them like specters at a feast. "What the hell?" Leela shouted, grabbing onto the nearest solid object. "Not part of the plan," Snipe yelled, clutching his tools as if they could ward off the impending chaos. Ryland steadied himself, heart pounding. "Looks like we're making friends already." The glow intensified, filling the chamber with blinding light. The ship's alarms blared in response, a cacophony of panic that matched the rising tension. "We need to move now," Ryland ordered, grabbing the device and making a break for the exit. The cathedral seemed to come alive, its walls shifting and groaning as if it were waking from a long slumber. The crew sprinted through the corridors, the floor trembling beneath their feet. "Next time, remind me to pick a safer job," Snipe gasped, struggling to keep pace. "Like gardening," Leela added, her breath ragged but determined. They burst out of the cathedral, the alien structure rumbling ominously behind them. They floated back towards the ship, urgency driving them faster than fear. "Captain, they're closing in," came the static-laden voice of their communications officer over the comms. "Who?" Ryland asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. "Everyone," the officer replied. "Every damn faction that wants this tech just showed up on our doorstep," Ryland cursed under his breath. "Of course they did. They must have us bugged." As they reached the regretful decision, the ship's engines roared to life, ready to make a hasty retreat. The neutron star loomed ominously, a silent reminder of the stakes. "Get us out of here, Leela," Ryland commanded, urgency in every syllable. "On it," Leela responded, her fingers dancing over the controls. The ship lurched forward, a desperate bid to escape as hostile ships closed in, weapons primed and ready to turn them into space debris. "Welcome to the party," Ryland muttered, heart racing as they danced on the edge of oblivion. And just like that they were off, plunging into the chaos of space with a prize that might just save them or doom them all. The regretful decision hummed with the stressed groans of metal holding back a universe that wanted them very dead. Rylan leaned back in his seat, the weight of the alien device a heavy reminder in his hand. The thing was a marvel of alien engineering, or maybe just a fancy paperweight. Hard to tell with alien tech. It sat there, clicking and whirring, like it was trying to figure out why it existed too. Alien existential crisis or not, they dragged it aboard and now they had to figure out what to do with it. So, we're officially in possession of an intergalactic doohickey. How's that for a resume booster? Rylan quipped, tossing it onto the console with a thunk that made Snipe wince. Resume booster or death certificate, hard to tell, Snipe said, eyeing the device like it might explode. Which, knowing their luck, wasn't off the table. Leela, still at the helm, was guiding the ship with all the finesse of a drunk ballerina. Any bright ideas on how we get out of this mess? Or are we just hoping they run out of ammo first? Hope and optimism. On this ship, Rylan laughed. I thought you knew us better than that. The ship shook as blaster fire skimmed past, making the hull ping like a giant tuning fork. Whoever was out there wanted the doohickey and they weren't asking nicely. Rylan figured it was a rival faction, or three, all of them equally unfriendly and armed to the teeth. Captain, crackled a voice from the comms. It was Jav, their communications officer, sounding like he'd rather be anywhere else. We've got a distress signal coming from the cathedral. Great, Rylan muttered. Another problem begging for our attention. What does it say? Something about aliens breached, send help, oh God. Why did I think this was a good idea? Jav read out, a note of amusement in his voice. So, another bunch of idiots got themselves caught in the same trap, Snipe said. Maybe we could form a support group. Yeah, hi, my name is Rylan and I made a bad decision, Leela joked, swerving the ship to avoid another volley of shots. The regretful decision support group, Rylan added. Where all your regrets come to make even more regrets. The situation was getting hotter by the minute, and Rylan knew they couldn't just sit and wait for someone with a bigger gun to show up. The neutron star was a constant threat, pulling at their atoms with curious fingers, and rival factions were moving in like vultures on a dying animal. All right, team, Rylan said, drilling the same calm into his voice that he always used when the world was about to end. Let's see if we can't do something stupid enough to work. They needed an edge, something to tip the scales in their favor. That meant digging deeper into the cathedral's secrets, whether it wanted them to or not. Rylan didn't trust the thing not to bite back, but at this point, they didn't have much choice. We need intel, Rylan said, turning to Snipe. Think you can hack into the cathedral's systems? Hack, sure, Snipe grinned, already pulling out his tools. I just need to ask it nicely, with a crowbar. With the rest of the crew holding the fort, Snipe got to work. The cathedral's systems were alien, inscrutable, and about as welcoming as a bear trap. But Snipe loved a challenge like any sane man loves a hole in the head. Hey, remember when we used to be bored? Snipe said, wires in hand, eyes locked on his console. Good times. Bored? I think you're confusing that with alive, Rylan replied. The ship shuddered again and Leela swore under her breath, weaving through the chaos like a dancer dodging knives. Got it, Snipe exclaimed, a wicked grin splitting his face. We've got a map of the cathedral's internal systems. Rylan leaned over, peering at the screen. It was a tangle of lines and nodes, a blueprint of madness. But there, near the center, was a hub of energy readings that might just be the jackpot. Looks like we found the heart of the beast, Rylan said. Now we just need to reach it before someone else does. And how exactly do we do that with half the galaxy firing at us? Leela asked, skepticism dripping from every word. Same way we always do, Rylan said with a shrug. Recklessly and with style. Style? On this ship, Leela quipped. You're delusional. True, but delusional people make the best heroes. With their course set, they plunged back towards the cathedral, the alien structure looming like a scorned deity. The external threats were mounting, the rival factions closing in like sharks tasting blood in the water. But Rylan had a plan, and it was just crazy enough to work. As they approached the cathedral, the device they'd grabbed began to pulse, a rhythmic beat that thrummed in Ryland's bones. It was reacting to something, or maybe giving them the finger. Either way, it was doing something new, and that was usually bad news. Captain," Leela said, glancing nervously at the device. "I think your new toy is trying to tell us something." "Yeah, like nice knowing you," Snipe added. The readings from Snipe's makeshift hack suggested the device and the cathedral were more intertwined than they'd realized. It wasn't just a piece of tech, it was a key. And keys open doors or blow things up. "All right, let's see what this baby can do," Ryland said, hefting the device with a mix of trepidation and hope. "Everyone, brace for something unexpected." Probably involving fire and screaming. With a few deft movements, Ryland slotted the device into place within the cathedral's inner sanctum. The structure reacted instantly, lights flickering to life and systems humming with power. It was beautiful, in a run-for-your-life kind of way. The cathedral's defenses shifted, realigning their targets. The rival factions found themselves facing a storm of alien wrath, the structure lashing out with beams and energy pulses, buying the crew of the regretful decision precious time. "Looks like we've got the home team advantage," Snipe said, watching the chaos unfold on the screen. "Let's not get cocky," Ryland cautioned. "We still have to get out of here." As they turned to leave, a new message crackled over the comms, this one a direct line from within the cathedral. It was garbled, desperate, and unmistakably human. "Quell," the voice said, barely audible over the static. "This is Captain Varus of the Eclipse. We got caught with our pants down here. If you can get us out, we'll owe you one." Ryland recognized the name. Varus had a reputation as a mercenary cut from the same cynical cloth, though perhaps a shade darker. They'd crossed paths before, usually on opposite sides of some moral line. "Varus," Ryland replied, adopting a mockingly gracious tone. "Fancy meeting you in such a lovely place. What happened? Take a wrong turn at Albuquerque?" "More like got stabbed in the back," Varus grumbled. "We were onto something big here, but it turned on us. You wouldn't leave an old rival to fry, would you?" "Leave you to fry? Varus, I'm shocked you'd think so little of me," Ryland said, grinning despite himself. "But a favor's worth its weight in gold these days." "Fine," Varus said, resignation in her voice. "Get us out and we'll call it even." Ryland gestured to Leela. "Plot a course to their location. Let's see if we can't play hero for a day." Leela punched in the coordinates, the ship shifting course with reluctance. The cathedral was still doing its best impression of a war zone, and navigating it required the kind of finesse that could easily end with them as smears on the walls. "Remember, folks," Ryland said, voice light with faux cheer, "we rescue them, grab what we can, and then we ghost out of here." "Easy peasy." "Yeah, because nothing ever goes wrong when you say things like that," Snipe snorted. The regretful decision slid through the chaos, dodging debris and weaving past energy bolts that lit up the void. It was a dance of desperation, one wrong move away from disaster. They reached the coordinates, finding the Eclipse battered but intact, nestled among the cathedral's tendrils. The other crew was in bad shape, pinned down by automated turrets and looking like they'd seen better days. "All right, Varus," Ryland said over the comms. "We're here to save your sorry asses. You better be ready to move when we give the word." "Copy that, Quell," Varus replied, her voice strained but grateful. "You lead, we'll follow." Snipe worked the console, overriding the turrets with the same reckless abandon he applied to most things in life. "Turrets are distracted. Should give them an opening," he said, not quite hiding the pride in his voice. "Go," Ryland commanded, and the Eclipse fired its engines, lurching out of its entrapment like a beast breaking free. The two ships tore through the cathedral, the alien structure still embroiled in its own battle against the rival factions. The chaos was a perfect cover, the kind of madness that could swallow a dozen ships without a trace. "Now, let's get the hell out of here," Ryland said, urgency pushing every word. "With pleasure," Leela replied, her fingers dancing over the controls. The regretful decision and the Eclipse shot out of the cathedral, the vacuum of space welcoming them with open arms. Behind them, the rival factions continued to batter each other, unaware or uncaring that their prize had slipped away. For now, they were free. For now, they'd won. But Rylan knew better than to rest easy. Victory in their line of work was a fleeting thing, more illusion than reality. As the stars streaked past, Rylan sat back, the device still humming softly beside him. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. And like any good survivor, he'd take it. "Well, that was fun," Snipe said, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. "Who's up for round two?" Rylan grinned, feeling the familiar fire in his chest, the thrill of surviving against the odds. "Let's save the encore for another day, shall we?" The crew laughed, the sound echoing through the ship like the first sign of life after a long winter. They'd made it through, and for now, that was enough. "Next stop somewhere not trying to kill us," Rylan declared. "It's been a long day." And with that, the regretful decision sailed into the unknown, leaving behind the chaos and the ruins of 1,000 broken dreams. They were still alive, still fighting, and still irreverently defiant in the face of the universe's cruelty. After all, what was life without a little regret? The regretful decision hummed with tension, the kind that settled in your bones like an unwelcome guest. Rylan sat at the console, eyeing the alien device with suspicion. It had just helped them make a daring escape, sure, but he wasn't about to start trusting something that glowed ominously and made his teeth vibrate. "All right, gang," Rylan announced, waving a hand like a conductor ready to unleash a symphony of chaos. "Who's up for poking the angry alien bear?" Lyra Sable, the ship's engineer and resident expert on making it up as we go along, trudged into the room, a toolkit clanking at her side. "You sure this thing isn't gonna explode if I look at it funny?" "Pretty sure," Rylan said, not sounding convinced. "But hey, if it does, at least it'll be quick." "Comforting," Lyra replied. "Guess I better get to work, before any more of our friends out there decide to drop by unannounced." The cathedral's defenses had temporarily bought them some time, but the rival factions were like a bad rash, persistent and irritating. If they didn't figure out how to use the alien tech soon, they'd be facing more than just awkward questions at their next check-in. Lyra approached the device with the cautious optimism of someone defusing a bomb while blindfolded. She examined the glowing contraption, her fingers dancing over its surface like a pianist feeling out a tune, hoping it didn't turn into a funeral march. "Looks like it's some kind of control interface," she muttered, half to herself, half to the universe at large. "It's got energy conduits, data ports, maybe even a coffee maker. Hard to tell with these alien designs. Coffee would be nice," Snipe quipped, lounging nearby. "Though I'd settle for buttons labeled in a language we understand." Lyra snorted, shaking her head. "If only life were so kind." Just then the ship shuddered violently, throwing Lyra off balance. The lights flickered ominously and an alarm blared, its tone suggesting that the universe was about to end, or at least their little corner of it. "Great," Rylan sighed, steadying himself against the console. "What now?" The answer came in the form of Jav, the ever-dutiful communications officer, rushing in with a glint of panic in his eyes. "Captain, we've got a problem. The cathedral's defenses are going haywire." "Haywire how?" Rylan asked, though he suspected he wasn't going to like the answer. "More like shoot first, never ask questions kind of haywire," Jav replied, gesturing to the holographic display showing the cathedral's systems lighting up like a Christmas tree from hell. "It's targeting everything, including us." "Terrific," Rylan said dryly. "Add avoid self-destruct sequence to today's to-do list." Lyra scowled at the device, as if blaming it for their current predicament. "Guess we need to figure out how to shut this thing down before it decides vaporizing us is the best course of action." "No pressure," Rylan deadpanned. "Just the usual life or death stakes." As Lyra hunched over the device trying to decipher its secrets, the crew braced themselves for the inevitable chaos. Outside, the rival factions continued to clash, blissfully unaware that the cathedral might just squash them all like bugs. Meanwhile, Lyra was making progress, if you could call it that. She'd managed to coax the device into displaying a series of alien symbols, none of which made any sense, unless you were a fan of abstract art. Any chance those symbols come with a translation guide? Snipe asked, peering over Lyra's shoulder. Yeah, just next to the self-destruct button, Lyra replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I'm trying to cross-reference it with the data we pulled from the cathedral's systems. Well, hurry, Rylan urged. I'd rather not end up as space debris. The ship shuddered again, a low groan resonating through its frame. Rylan could almost feel the annoyed sigh of the universe as if it was tired of their antics. He didn't blame it. Captain, Leela's voice crackled over the intercom, we've got hull breaches. The rival factions sending boarding parties. They've decided to join the party up close and personal. Great, Rylan muttered. Just when I thought this day couldn't get any better, time for some close-quarter diplomacy, Snipe said, reaching for his weapon. And by diplomacy I mean shooting. What else would you mean? Rylan replied with a dry chuckle. All right, team, let's show our guests some hospitality. As the boarding alerts pinged throughout the ship, Rylan and his crew prepared to repel the intruders. They'd been in tight spots before, but this one felt like a losing hand that demanded a bluff. Meanwhile, Lyra stayed focused on the device. With a few deft movements, she managed to tap into some kind of interface, a holographic display springing to life. It was a map of the cathedral's internal systems, tangled and convoluted like the thoughts of a mad god. There we go, she muttered triumphantly. Now we're getting somewhere. Somewhere better than here, I hope, Rylan said, checking his weapon. Because right now, here sucks. Lyra glanced at the map, her eyes narrowing as she traced the connections. Looks like it controls more than just the defenses. Maybe we can use it to our advantage. Assuming it doesn't fry us first, Rylan said, nodding. But at this point, I'm game for anything. With a few more swipes, Lyra attempted to redirect the cathedral's defenses, aiming to turn the automated turrets on the boarding parties instead of their own ship. It was ambitious, reckless, and exactly the kind of crazy plan that might just work, or blow up in their faces. All right, turrets are set to friendly fire, Lyra said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Here's hoping the alien AI agrees with our new policy. Let's find out, Rylan mused, as the doors slid open to reveal a group of hostile boarders. The crew sprang into action, the corridors erupting into a cacophony of gunfire and shouted orders. The rival faction had sent a motley assortment of mercenaries, pirates, and assorted scumbags, all looking to make a name for themselves by taking out Rylan and his team. The battle was intense, chaotic, and utterly ridiculous. Rylan and his crew fought with desperation, using every dirty trick and underhanded tactic they'd learned over the years. It was less of a coordinated defense and more of a bar fight in zero gravity. Hey, Snipe, Rylan called over the din, ducking behind cover. Next time we pick a vacation spot, how about somewhere with fewer homicidal maniacs? Where's the fun in that? Snipe replied, returning fire with a grin. As the firefight continued, the alien device glowed brighter, reacting to something within the cathedral. Lyra, still glued to the console, adjusted the controls with fevered intensity, trying to maintain control of the turrets. Then, just as it seemed they might be overwhelmed, the cathedral's defenses finally responded. A series of energy pulses shot out, targeting the boarders with ruthless precision. The attackers were caught off guard, their ranks thinning as they scrambled for cover. Well, I'll be damned, Rylan said, watching the alien tech work its lethal magic. Looks like we made a new friend. Don't get too cozy, Lyra warned. This thing's as likely to turn on us as help. The remaining boarders, realizing they'd bitten off more than they could chew, retreated into the corridors, leaving behind casualties and confusion. The ship fell silent once more, the only sound the hum of the engines and the distant thrum of the alien device. Rylan took a moment to breathe, his mind racing with possibilities and problems. They'd managed to stave off the immediate threat, but the rival factions wouldn't stay down for long. And then there was the device, A wild card that could be their salvation or their doom. "So what's our next move?" Snipe asked, holstering his weapon. "First, we patch the ship," Ryland said, ticking off the essentials. "Then we figure out how to get out of this death trap before its owners wake up. And the device?" Lyra asked, nodding toward the glowing artifact that had become the center of their universe. Ryland shrugged. "We keep poking it until it does something useful or explodes." "Same as always. Sounds like a plan," Lyra said with a weary smile. As the crew set to work, repairing the ship and securing their newfound prize, Ryland couldn't help but feel a strange sense of optimism. They'd survived against the odds, made allies out of enemies, and even found a way to turn alien tech to their advantage. For now, they were still in the game, and that was all that mattered. The universe might be a cruel, unforgiving place, but they were still standing, still fighting, and still willing to laugh in the face of danger. "All right, folks," Rylan announced, clapping his hands for attention. "Let's get this bucket patched up and figure out our next move. The galaxy isn't going to save itself." With that, the crew of the Regretful Decision continued their madcap journey through the stars, leaving behind the chaos of the cathedral and setting their sights on whatever fresh hell awaited them. Because, after all, what was the point of living without a little regret? The Regretful Decision limped through the void like a drunk stumbling home after a particularly rough night. Panels sparking, hull plating rattling, and a general ambience of impending doom hovered over the crew like a rain cloud made of anxiety. Rylan Quell, captain in title and professional cynic by trade, glanced around the bridge. "All right, folks, conference time. Gather round and don't mind the smoke. It's just our ship slowly cooking us alive." Leela, the daring pilot with a talent for steering clear of anything resembling sanity, strapped herself into a chair that looked like it had been recycled from an old torture chamber. "Must be Tuesday," she quipped, fingers dancing over the controls. "Can't wait to see what the second half of the week brings." "Yeah, I'm betting on slightly more catastrophic," Snipe said, leaning against the bulkhead. His casual posture clashed with the jagged gash in the wall beside him. "But we could always die sooner, save us all the trouble." Ryland shook his head. "You and your optimism, Snipe. It's what keeps this crew going." Jav, the communications officer whose default mode was fretful, was scanning through static-riddled channels. "Captain, I'm still picking up chatter from the rival factions. They're regrouping and sound like they're planning another round." "Of course they are," Lyra sighed, flicking the alien device's interface with a finger. It obediently responded with more incomprehensible symbols. "Like we don't have enough problems. Can we at least make them bring snacks?" Rylan rubbed his temples, the pressure of command weighing down like a particularly persistent migraine. "Ideas, thoughts, complaints about the crappy food. Now's the time." Lyra, the ship's chief tinkerer of all things both high-tech and half-broken, focused on the glowing alien gizmo. "I might have something," she said, her voice tinged with the enthusiasm of someone trying to sell a bridge in the desert. "If we can reroute some of the cathedral's tech to bolster our shields, we might hold out longer." "Let me guess. There's a catch," Ryland deadpanned. "Of course." Lyra's smile was a grim reflection of Ryland's own. "If it doesn't work, it might turn our shielding into an attractive force for plasma bolts. So basically, either protect us or paint a target on our backs," Snipe noted. "I love a plan with options." "Let's say we do this," Ryland said, hands on hips, the universal posture for I'm about to make a terrible decision. "Are we going full defense, or do we make these bastards regret picking a fight?" "And here I thought I was the reckless one," Leela grinned. "But yeah, let's give him a black eye while we're at it." Ryland nodded. "All right, Lyra, make it happen. But let's talk ethics for a second. How do we feel about using this tech?" "We're talking about weaponizing something we barely understand." Jav, ever the voice of caution in their merry band of chaos, spoke up. "We could be unleashing something we can't control. There's a reason the aliens left this stuff lying around. Maybe they just didn't want it hogging closet space," Snipe shrugged. Look, if it's us or them, I vote us. Nice to know you're on our side, Leela said, her eyes fixed on the stars streaming past. Still, turning alien tech into a weapon is kind of like playing Russian roulette with a laser cannon. Rylan considered their words, standing at the intersection of necessity and morality. Do we want to become the very thing we're fighting? Or are we just trying to survive long enough to figure things out? Lyra glanced up, her expression as hard as the circuits she worked with. Survival first, philosophy later. If this tech keeps us breathing, it's worth the risk. Hey, I'm all for not dying, Snipe said, scratching at the stubble on his chin. And if we accidentally end up being the bad guys? Well, it's not like anyone's keeping score. Except maybe the universe, Rylan muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The universe, vast and indifferent, didn't seem to care much about who was playing fair. Lyra got to work, wires snaking across the console like veins in some alien organism. The ship's systems hummed with tentative excitement, as if sensing the gamble they were about to take. Outside, a new threat was assembling. The rival factions, now sporting a few fresh scars courtesy of the cathedral's defenses, were gathering their forces. Their ships hung in space like vultures, waiting for the right moment to swoop in and peck at the remains. Looks like the neighbors are getting restless, Jav reported, flicking through the surveillance feeds. We might want to get a move on before they decide to bring the housewarming gifts. You're full of good news today, Rylan said, strapping himself into his seat. All right, Lyra, do your magic. With a final twist of a screwdriver and a prayer to whatever cosmic forces were still listening, Lyra activated the rerouted systems. The ship shuddered, an ominous whine reverberating through the hull as alien energy surged through the conduits. Shields are up, Lyra reported, her voice carrying a note of triumph. And no explosions, yet. That's what I like to hear, Rylan said. Now let's see if we can give our friends a little surprise. True to their desperate optimism, Lyra's gamble paid off. The regretful decision glowed with an ethereal light, shields augmented by the alien tech, creating a barrier that pulsed with borrowed power. The rival factions, thinking they'd caught their prey, launched their next assault. Plasma bolts and missiles streaked through the void, a deadly fireworks show aimed squarely at the beleaguered ship. But the regretful decision weathered the storm, the augmented shields absorbing the onslaught with a resilience that defied expectations. The crew watched the monitors with a mix of disbelief and relief, their survival hanging by a thread that was somehow becoming less thread-like. Looks like it's working, Snipe said, his voice tinged with awe. I'd say we owe the aliens a thank you card, but I doubt they're still checking their mail. Can't believe we're still here, Leela said, shaking her head in amazement. And in one piece, no less. Rylan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Let's not start celebrating just yet. We need to keep them off balance. Lyra, can we use the same tech offensively? Lyra hesitated, the weight of the decision clear in her eyes. We could try, but I can't guarantee it won't blow up in our faces, literally. Well, if it's our faces or theirs. Snipe didn't finish the thought, the implication hanging heavy in the smoky air. Rylan weighed the options, the scales tipping towards a choice he wasn't entirely comfortable with. But survival was a powerful motivator, and they weren't exactly overwhelmed with alternatives. Let's do it, he decided. Jav, plot a course away from here. Leela, get ready to punch it once we've given them a parting gift. The crew moved with a practiced urgency, the kind born from too many brushes with oblivion. As Lyra recalibrated the alien device, the rest of the team prepared for what might come next. Outside, the rival factions were regrouping, their comms buzzing with the urgency of predators sensing wounded prey. Rylan could almost feel their anticipation, the thrill of the hunt driving them towards one final push. But this time, the regretful decision was ready. With a flick of a switch and a silent prayer, Lyra activated the offensive protocols. The ship bucked like a wild stallion, energy arcing through its frame as the alien tech roared to life. A beam of pure, blinding energy lanced out from the regretful decision, slicing through the void with surgical precision. The rival ships, caught by surprise, scrambled to evade, but the damage was done. Hulls shattered, engines sputtered, and for once the attackers were on the back foot. The crew watched the chaos with a mix of horror and satisfaction. They'd turned the tables, but at what cost? Behind the bravado and dark humor, a question lingered. What had they unleashed? "All right, Leela, get us out of here," Rylan ordered, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "We've overstayed our welcome." With a surge of power, the regretful decision shot away from the battlefield, leaving behind a trail of destruction and unanswered questions. The crew settled into their routines, the adrenaline fading to leave an uncertain calm. "Well, that was something," Snipe said, eyeing the glowing device with a mixture of respect and apprehension. "Let's not make a habit of this yet." "No promises," Rylan replied, slumping into his seat. "But we'll try to keep things interesting." As the ship hurtled into the unknown, Rylan allowed himself a moment to reflect. They'd survived another day, but the cost of their victory was still unfolding. The galaxy was a vast, unfathomable place, filled with wonders and dangers beyond imagining. But for now, at least they were still in the game, and in a universe where nothing was certain, that was enough. "Good job, everyone," he said, looking around at his crew, their ragtag family of misfits and survivors. "Let's keep it together. The next challenge is just around the corner." With a shared nod and a few murmured agreements, the crew returned to their duties. Because in the end, that's what they did. They flew, they fought, and they faced whatever the universe threw at them. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to make it through the madness. Rylan Quell leaned back in his captain's chair, staring at the flickering console as if it owed him money. "Well, that was a day and a half," he muttered, the adrenaline ebbing like a tide that left only the flotsam of exhaustion in its wake. "More like a week," Snipe replied, his voice hoarse from yelling at systems that refused to cooperate. He slumped against the wall, looking every bit the poster child for too old for this crap. "We need to talk," Lyra said, her tone as serious as a heart attack. All eyes turned to her, except for Rylan's, which stayed fixed on the console. "No, seriously, eyes over here, Captain. Last time someone said that, I ended up missing a kidney," Rylan jibed, but he turned his chair anyway. "This isn't funny," she snapped. "We've got a serious breach in the cathedral. Rival factions are screwing around in there, and it's only a matter of time before they decide to pay us a house call." "House calls are nice," Jav chimed in, his voice dripping with irony. "They usually bring cookies, maybe a plasma bomb or two," Rylan sighed, rubbing his temples like he could massage away the headache forming there. "All right, what's our situation?" "Bad," Leela said, her fingers drumming nervously on the pilot's controls. "And by bad, I mean we're about one step away from being cosmic roadkill." "Cheerful as always, Leela," Snipe said. "Why don't you tell us how you really feel?" "All right," she shot back. "We're stuck between a neutron star and a hard place. The rival factions are clamping down, and our beloved ship is about as sturdy as wet paper." Lyra stepped forward, energy snapping in her movements. "And the alien tech. No idea how long we can keep pushing it before it decides to blow us all sky high." "Great," Rylan said, looking around at his ragtag crew. "So, in summary, we're outmatched, outgunned, and out of patience. Did I miss anything?" "Just the part where we're totally screwed," Snipe added helpfully. "Thanks, Snipe." "I'd hate to forget that bit." Jav glanced at the screens, frowning like a man who'd just found a hole in his sock. "Just got a new feed from the cathedral. Looks like they've breached the inner sanctum. They're not here for tea," Rylan groaned, a sound that was equal parts frustration and resignation. "All right, team. Suggestions? How about a nice dirt nap?" Snipe grinned, though his humor was as dark as the space outside. "Pass," Rylan replied. "I'm still working through my bucket list." Leela leaned back, her chair creaking ominously. "We could try talking to them, with words instead of missiles." "Do I look like a diplomat?" Rylan asked, gesturing to his rumpled uniform and 3-day stubble. "Kind of if you squint and have terrible taste," Snipe said. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Rylan replied, shaking his head. Seriously, what are our options? Lyra tapped her fingers on the alien device, a contemplative frown pulling at her lips. We could try using this thing to send a false signal. Make them think reinforcements are coming. Does that work? Jav asked, his voice slipping into its usual fretful timbre. It works in the movies, Lyra replied with a shrug. But real life doesn't come with a guarantee. Neither do we, Ryland said. Let's do it. Lyra, get that thing working. Leela, keep us steady. Jav, monitor comms. Snipe, pray to whatever gods you still believe in. Praying sounds suspiciously like work, Snipe replied, but he closed his eyes anyway, mumbling what might have been a prayer, or possibly a grocery list. The ship trembled underfoot, an unwelcome reminder of its precarious state. Lyra dove into the console, hands moving with the deftness of a gambler on a winning streak. The alien device glowed menacingly, like it knew it was being used for mischief and didn't entirely approve. Lights blinked erratically, casting eerie shadows across the bridge. Here goes nothing, Lyra said, flipping a switch with the confidence of someone who'd long since accepted the universe's capricious nature. A high-pitched whine filled the air, causing everyone to wince. Is that good or bad? Rylan asked, raising an eyebrow. Define good, Lyra replied, her eyes glued to the readouts. Good as us not dying, Rylan said. Then let's aim for that, she replied, tweaking the controls with fervent intensity. The device let out one final beep and went dark, leaving the crew staring at each other in the sudden silence. And now we wait, Jav said, glancing nervously at the display. If they believe our little charade, they might back off. And if they don't, Leela asked, her voice carrying a note of defiance. Then we're about to have company, Ryland said, folding his arms. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. The crew sat in a tense quiet, ears straining for any hint of the rival faction's intentions. Finally, the comms crackled to life. Looks like they're hesitating, Jav announced, a hint of relief in his tone. Maybe we've bought ourselves a little time. Time is good. We like time, Ryland said, glancing at the crew. Now we need a plan that doesn't involve us getting blown to bits. That's a tall order, Snipe noted. But hey, I'm up for the challenge. Ryland stood, stretching out the kinks in his back. All right, new plan. We dig in, see what resources we have left, and figure out how to hold out until help arrives, or we think of something smarter. Is anyone actually coming to help? Leela asked, her skepticism clear. Probably not, Rylan admitted. But saying it makes me feel better. Lyra looked up from her console, a rare smile ghosting her lips. Well, Captain, if you're going to lie, you might as well make it a good one. Exactly my point, Rylan replied. Let's get to work. The crew scattered to their stations, each one tasked with piecing together the scraps of hope they had left. They were running on fumes, tempers frayed and patience stretched thin. Yet somehow they held on, clinging to the ragged edge of survival. As the minutes turned into hours, the ship continued its solitary journey through the void. The cathedral loomed behind them, a silent witness to their struggle, and within its ancient halls the rival factions prowled, ever searching for a way to turn the tables. Jav kept his eyes glued to the screens, looking for any sign of activity. I'm getting something, he said, his voice breaking the quiet. Good something or bad something? Rylan asked, not daring to hope. Depends on your perspective, Jav replied. It looks like they've started talking to each other. Could be negotiations, or maybe they're planning our funeral. Let's hope for the former, Rylan said, though his expression suggested he was ready for the latter. Lyra piped up, an edge of sarcasm coloring her words. Well, if it's a funeral, at least they'll know where to find us. We won't even need to send out invitations. Always looking on the bright side, aren't you? Leela quipped. It's a gift, Lyra replied with a smirk. Another tense silence descended, broken only by the hum of the ship's systems and the occasional sigh from Snipe, who was trying to nap in a corner. Any chance we can make a run for it? Leela asked, more out of sheer stubbornness than genuine optimism. With our luck, we'd run headfirst into an asteroid, Ryland said, shaking his head. No, we need to stay put for now. So we sit tight, pretend we're not terrified, and hope they get bored, Snipe said, summing up their predicament with typical bluntness. Pretty much, Rylan replied. Welcome to space where nothing is ever simple. The minutes crawled by, each one heavier than the last. The crew kept busy checking systems, adjusting settings, doing anything to keep their minds off the ticking clock. Then just as the tension reached its breaking point, the comms lit up again. Jav scrambled to decode the message, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Looks like they're backing off, he said, disbelief mingling with relief. We might have bluffed our way out of this one. A collective sigh swept through the bridge, the tension dissipating like a summer storm. For a moment, they allowed themselves to believe they might actually survive this mess. Good job, everyone, Ryland said, his voice carrying a warmth that was rare but genuine. I knew you had it in you. Just another day in paradise, Snipe quipped, though his grin was genuine. The crew settled back into their seats, exhaustion etched into their faces. They'd survived another round, but the fight was far from over. As they drifted through the void, Rylan couldn't help but wonder what fresh hell awaited them. But for now, they were alive, and in this galaxy, that was no small victory. So what's next? Leela asked, her eyes scanning the stars. Whatever the universe throws at us, Rylan replied. And maybe a nap. Amen to that, Snipe said, closing his eyes with a contented sigh. And so they continued their journey, a band of misfits in a ship held together by hope, humor, and a touch of insanity. Together, they faced the unknown, ready for whatever the cosmos decided to throw their way. Because in the end, they were all they had, and sometimes that was enough. The bridge of the regretful decision was still steeped in that uneasy quiet when Lyra, tapping at the alien device like she was trying to find the right station on a busted radio, suddenly sat up straighter. Her eyes glinted with the kind of mischief that suggested she was about to suggest something truly outlandish, which, given their current predicament, was saying something. All right, Lyra said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I've got an idea. We've been looking at this alien tech all wrong. Rylan looked up from his console, eyebrow arched. Does it involve us not dying? It just might, she replied, a devilish grin spreading across her face. Jav leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. I'm all ears. What have you got? She gestured at the device, her enthusiasm practically vibrating off her. What if we use this to create something beautiful? Snipe snorted from his corner where he'd been napping. Beautiful. Lyra, we're not exactly in the art business. Not beautiful like a painting, you cynic, Lyra shot back. I mean, something these factions might see as worth more than a tactical advantage. Something that shows them what the universe could be instead of just what it is. Rylan frowned, skepticism warring with curiosity. If you're about to suggest projectile poetry, I'm out. Just trust me on this one, Captain. I've been fiddling with this thing, and I think I can make it sing. Leela piped up, her voice a mixture of disbelief and hope. You mean like literal singing, or one of those metaphors people keep using, sort of both, Lyra replied, eyes gleaming with that dangerous light of invention. I can use the device to project images and sounds. A kind of cosmic symphony, Jav blinked, clearly trying to wrap his head around the concept. You're saying this thing can create art? Like alien art, Lyra nodded. Exactly. And if we can make something so undeniably beautiful, maybe, just maybe, it'll give them pause, make them see the bigger picture. Or they'll just see it as a fancy distraction and blast us into dust, Snipe muttered, ever the optimist. Worth a shot, Ryland said, rubbing his stubbled chin thoughtfully. We've tried everything else. And honestly, I'm running out of ideas. Great, Lyra said, already half buried in the console. Give me a little time and I'll have something that'll make those rival factions question their life choices. Time is something we're not exactly swimming in, Leela pointed out, her gaze flicking to the blinking threat indicators. Let's hope they are as uninspired as we are, Ryland said, settling back into his chair. The crew watched as Lyra worked, tapping commands into the device with the precision of a virtuoso. The alien tech responded with a series of hums and pulses, its lights flickering in a way that was almost playful. So what exactly is this masterpiece going to look like? Rylan asked, intrigued despite himself. You'll see, Lyra replied with a wink, fingers dancing over the controls. Trust me, it'll be worth the wait. As she worked, the seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. The ship systems hummed their usual tune of barely controlled chaos, but the tension on the bridge was palpable. Finally, Lyra leaned back, her expression a mix of triumph and exhaustion. It's ready, all right, Ryland said, his voice carrying that rare edge of hope. Let's see this galactic miracle. Lyra activated the device and the bridge was suddenly flooded with light. Colors swirled and danced, forming patterns that defied description. It was like staring into the heart of a nebula, all swirling chaos and brilliant hues. The crew watched, captivated, as the images shifted and changed. Scenes of alien worlds, lush and vibrant, filled the air. Strange creatures, both beautiful and terrifying, moved through landscapes that seemed to defy gravity and logic. And then came the music, a haunting, ethereal melody that resonated deep within, stirring emotions they hadn't realized they still had. It was a sound that spoke of infinite possibilities, of hope and despair intertwined. For a moment, the chaos of their situation faded away, replaced by a sense of wonder and awe. Even Snipe, notorious for his skepticism, sat in silence, eyes wide. Wow, Leela breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. That's incredible. Jav nodded, his usual sardonic expression softened by the spectacle. I'll admit, I didn't expect this. Rylan watched, awestruck, as the images continued to unfold. Okay, that's impressive. Now let's just hope it impresses them. The device continued its display, the images shifting to show scenes of cooperation and peace, visions of what could be if they chose a different path. Let's broadcast it, Lyra said, her voice filled with a quiet determination. Send it out to every ship within range. Let them see what we're offering. Rylan nodded, the weight of leadership not feeling so heavy for once. Do it. Send them the message. Lyra tapped a few final commands into the console and the display began to transmit, beaming their message of hope and possibility into the void. The crew watched in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It was a gamble, a shot in the dark, but it was a chance at something better. Minutes passed, stretching into an eternity as they waited for a response. The tension on the bridge was a living thing, coiled and ready to strike. Finally, the comms crackled to life, Jav leaning forward to catch the message. We're getting something, he said, his voice taut with anticipation. What is it? Rylan asked, not daring to hope. Jav's expression was unreadable as he listened, then he turned, eyes meeting Rylan's. They want to talk. A collective sigh of relief swept through the bridge, though it was laced with an undercurrent of disbelief. So it worked? Leela asked, her skepticism giving way to a tentative hope. Looks like it, Jav replied, though his voice carried a note of caution. But they still want control. They're not convinced enough to back off completely. Rylan nodded, mentally preparing for the negotiation ahead. All right, let's see what they have to say. Open a channel. Jav activated the comms and a voice crackled through the speakers, sharp and demanding. This is Commander Vorton of the Red Eclipse. We've seen your little display. Impressive, but not enough to sway us. Rylan leaned forward, projecting an air of calm confidence he didn't quite feel. Commander Vorton, glad you enjoyed the show. Consider it a preview of what's possible if we stop trying to blow each other up. A nice sentiment, Vorton replied, a hint of begrudging respect in his tone. But we're still interested in the device. Hand it over, and we might consider a truce. Lyra bristled at the suggestion, but Rylan gave her a subtle shake of his head, signaling patience. We're open to discussions, but giving up the device isn't on the table. Then why should we trust you? Vorton demanded, suspicion lacing his words. Rylan paused, choosing his words carefully. Because you've seen what we can do with it. Imagine what we could achieve together. I'm not asking for blind faith, just a chance to prove we're more valuable as allies than enemies. There was a pause on the other end, the silence stretching taut as a bowstring. You're a smooth talker, Captain Quell, Vorton said finally. But words are cheap, true, Rylan acknowledged, but actions speak louder. We're willing to collaborate to share what we've learned. This isn't just about us. It's about a future where we aren't constantly at each other's throats. Lyra watched, her fingers twitching with a desire to leap into the conversation. But she knew Rylan needed to handle this, to weave his way through the verbal minefield. There was another pause, and then Vorton's voice returned, begrudging but intrigued. "All right, Captain, you've got my attention. We'll talk. But mark my words, if this is a trick, there won't be a second chance." Rylan nodded, relief mingling with the ever-present tension. "Understood. Let's find common ground." The channel closed, leaving a silence that was somehow more charged than before. The crew exchanged glances, each processing the potential shift in their fate. "Well, that was something," Leela said, her voice carrying a thread of disbelief. "Are we actually doing this?" "Seems like it," Snipe said, a hint of a smirk tugging at his lips. "Who knew all we needed was a bit of alien artistry?" Jav, ever the realist, tempered the moment of triumph. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've got a chance." Lyra leaned back, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Told you it would work." Rylan held her gaze, gratitude mixing with the weight of what lay ahead. "You did good, Lyra. Better than good. Don't go getting sentimental on me, Captain," she teased, though her eyes gleamed with pride. The crew settled back into their seats, the air crackling with a newfound energy. They'd taken a gamble, and for now it seemed to be paying off. As they drifted through the void, the threat of conflict loomed ever-present, yet there was a glimmer of something new, possibility. "All right, team," Rylan said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Let's keep this momentum going. We've managed to buy ourselves a little hope. Now let's make sure it doesn't blow up in our faces." "Easier said than done," Snipe quipped, but there was a hint of optimism in his voice. As the regretful decision continued its journey, the crew prepared for the next round. The stakes were high, the path uncertain, but they were ready. Because in the end, survival was an art, and they were nothing if not artists. The crew of the regretful decision sat in their threadbare seats, the bridge a patchwork quilt of hasty repairs and questionable structural integrity. The ship creaked ominously, like an old man getting out of bed too quickly, but for once, nobody seemed to care. They were all too busy staring at the swirling nebula of light and color that Lyra's little science project had unleashed. "It's like a laser light show," Leela murmured, eyes wide. "If the lasers were on acid." Rylan leaned back in his chair, trying to look nonchalant while his heart raced like a drunk trying to find his way home. "So, Vorton wants to talk. That's progress, right?" "Depends," Snipe said, tapping his fingers on his armrest like a man who was just waiting for the universe to kick him in the shins. "Talk could mean diplomacy, or it could mean delaying us until they line up a better shot." Jav, ever the voice of reason, or at least the closest approximation they had, nodded. "He's got a point. We shouldn't trust these guys further than Lyra can throw them." "Hey," Lyra protested, though there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "I can throw a mean wrench." "That you can," Rylan conceded, trying to ignore the fact that every plan they ever had seemed to involve throwing themselves headfirst into chaos. "But let's not test that theory just yet. We've got a chance here, folks. Let's not screw it up." The lights on the console continued to sparkle in a way that was almost hypnotic. Outside, the swirling patterns of color stretched out like a cosmic kaleidoscope, painting the void with hues that no human eye had any business seeing. "Beautiful," Leela said, with an edge of disbelief. "Beautiful and potentially lethal," Snipe added. "Like most of my ex-girlfriends. Or this ship," Jav said, gesturing around at the myriad of blinking lights that signaled various impending system failures. "She's beautiful, but one wrong move and we'll be kissing vacuum." Rylan stood up, stretching out the kinks in his weary muscles. "All right, let's not ruin the moment with our usual cynicism, shall we? We've got a potential truce on the table. Let's see if we can't turn this from a temporary ceasefire into something more lasting." "You're sounding dangerously optimistic there, Captain," Lyra teased, a playful glint in her eyes. "Don't get used to it," Rylan shot back. It's probably just the exhaustion talking. As if on cue, the comms panel crackled to life, drawing their attention like moths to a particularly sarcastic flame. Jav flicked a switch, and Vorton's voice, as smooth and oily as a used spaceship salesman, filled the bridge. "Captain Quell, congratulations. You've managed to make us all feel things we haven't felt in a long time. Mostly confusion and a bit of nausea, but the sentiment is appreciated." Rylan leaned in, projecting an air of calm confidence that was mostly smoke and mirrors. "Glad to hear it, Commander. We were hoping to inspire some reflection, maybe even a bit of introspection. Well, you certainly succeeded. Now let's cut to the chase. What exactly are you proposing?" Rylan exchanged a glance with Lyra, whose expression was a mix of excitement and nerves. "Simple," he said. "We stop trying to blow each other to bits and start working towards something a bit more productive. Cooperation, shared knowledge, maybe even, dare I say it, peace." There was a pause, during which Rylan imagined Vorton weighing his options like a particularly indecisive gambler. "You're serious about this? No tricks, no hidden agendas?" "Nothing hidden," Rylan assured him. "Just a genuine desire not to die horribly in the vast emptiness of space." There was a beat, and then Vorton's voice returned, sounding almost amused. "All right, Captain, we'll play along for now. But if this turns out to be a ploy, rest assured that our second salvo will not be nearly so forgiving." Rylan nodded, though he knew Vorton couldn't see him. "Understood. We'll send over the coordinates for a neutral meeting point, somewhere we can sit down and hash out the details." "Agreed," Vorton said, his voice losing some of its earlier hostility. "You may be onto something, Captain. Let's hope it doesn't blow up in your face." As the channel closed, Rylan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The crew around him seemed to do the same, the tension on the bridge easing just a fraction. "Well," Snipe said, breaking the silence with his trademark deadpan, "that was refreshing. A potential ceasefire instead of immediate annihilation. It's almost like we're making progress." "Don't get too excited," Lyra cautioned, though her grin betrayed her own cautious optimism. "It's a step, but we've got a long way to go before anyone starts singing Kumbaya." Rylan chuckled, the sound rusty and unused. "Let's not start breaking into song just yet. We've still got to make it to that meeting point without falling apart at the seams." "And hope that Vorton holds up his end of the bargain," Leela added, her voice laced with skepticism. "Here's hoping," Rylan said, settling back into his seat. "For now, let's focus on getting this old bucket there in one piece." The crew nodded, the unspoken understanding that had kept them alive this long settling over them like a well-worn cloak. They might be a ragtag bunch, held together by duct tape and sheer stubbornness, but they were still flying, still fighting. As the regretful decision limped through the stars, its battered hull reflecting the kaleidoscopic light of Lyra's creation, Rylan allowed himself a moment of hope. It was a shaky, fragile thing, but it was real. And in a universe where beauty and chaos danced hand in hand, that was something worth holding onto. The passage of time and space is a strange, nebulous thing. Moments stretch into eternities, and eternities compress into the blink of an eye. For the crew of the regretful decision, their journey to the neutral meeting point was both interminable and over in an instant. "Well," Lyra announced, breaking the uneasy silence, "here we are. Just a stone's throw from nowhere." The view from the bridge was a familiar one, stars scattered like diamonds on black velvet, the void stretching out in all directions, vast and indifferent. But there was also something new in the mix, a glimmer of promise. "Ah, the middle of nowhere," Snipe said, leaning back in his seat with the air of a man who had seen one too many long hauls. "Feels like home." Jav tapped a few buttons, bringing up the ship's sensors. "We're picking up the red eclipse on the scanners. Looks like Vorton's as good as his word." Rylan nodded, a mix of relief and caution swirling in his gut like an ill-advised cocktail. "All right, let's see how this plays out. Lyra, you're with me. If we're going to convince Vorton this isn't a trick, we'll need to show him what this device is really capable of." Lyra grinned, her eyes alight with the thrill of the challenge. You know me, Captain. I'm always up for showing off. Let's just hope Vorton doesn't have a sudden change of heart and decide he likes shooting at us better than talking, Leela said, her tone dry as sandpaper. Always the optimist, Leela, Rylan replied, a sardonic smile tugging at his lips. But you're not wrong. Everyone stay sharp. The red eclipse loomed into view, its silhouette stark against the starry backdrop. Rylan couldn't help but feel a prickle of unease. Trust was a rare commodity in their line of work, and he wasn't about to hand it out like candy on Halloween. Opening a channel, Jav announced, flicking a switch. The bridge filled with the soft hiss of static as the comms connected. Captain Quell, Vorton's voice came through, smooth as ever but with an edge of wariness. I'm glad to see you made it. Shall we proceed? Let's, Rylan replied, keeping his voice even. We're ready to show you what we've got. There was a pause, and then Vorton's reply crackled over the speakers. Very well. We're opening a secure channel for data transfer. Show us this miraculous device of yours. All right, Lyra, Rylan said, turning to her with a nod. It's showtime. Lyra's fingers danced over the console with the grace of a concert pianist, inputting commands and bringing the alien device to life once more. The bridge filled with light, the swirling colors and patterns more vibrant than ever. We're broadcasting, Lyra confirmed, her voice tinged with excitement. They should be seeing it on their end. For a moment there was silence. Then Vorton's voice returned, tinged with genuine awe. Incredible, it's like nothing I've ever seen. Rylan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Glad you like it, Commander. It's a taste of what we could accomplish together. Vorton's reply was slower this time, as if each word was being carefully measured. And you believe this? Art could be the key to peace. I do, Rylan said firmly. It's not just art, it's a reminder of what we're capable of when we stop fighting and start creating. There was another pause, and Rylan could almost hear the gears turning in Vorton's mind. Then finally the reply came. You've given us much to think about, Captain Quell. Let's discuss terms. The bridge erupted into quiet celebration, each crew member exchanging relieved smiles. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a start. Looks like we're not dead yet, Snipe said, his grin belying the words. Not dead and potentially on the path to peace, Jav mused. I didn't think I'd live to see the day. Rylan nodded, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but for now, let's enjoy the fact that we've managed to do something right. Lyra leaned back in her seat, a satisfied smile on her face. And to think, all it took was a bit of alien tech and a wild idea. Don't forget the stubbornness, Leela added with a smirk. That's the real secret ingredient here. Rylan chuckled, the sound more genuine than it had been in a long time. Well, whatever it is, it's working. Let's keep it up. As the regretful decision drifted through the stars, the crew allowed themselves a moment of hope. It was fragile, as all things tend to be in a universe that seemed hell-bent on tearing itself apart. But it was hope nonetheless. And in this strange, chaotic dance of creation and destruction, maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The regretful decision limped through space like a drunk staggering home after a particularly regrettable bender. Its hull groaned in protest, panels sparked at regular intervals, and the whole ship rattled like a tin can filled with angry wasps. But for once, the crew was in no rush to fix it, mostly because they didn't have the parts, the patience, or the slightest idea where to even start. Well, Rylan Quell said, leaning back in his chair with the air of a man who just dodged a bullet the size of a small moon, I think that went as well as could be expected. Jav snorted, his usual role as the voice of reason taking a back seat to his more cynical side. If by as well as could be expected you mean we didn't die horribly, then sure, call it a win. Lyra Sable, ever the tinkerer, was already up to her elbows in wires and alien tech, her fingers dancing over the controls like a kid let loose in a candy store. Honestly, I'm just amazed nothing's exploded yet. Give it time, Snipe interjected from his corner, his voice flat as a pancake on a Monday morning. Our luck doesn't usually hold, Rylan chuckled, a sound that was more rusty gate than musical note. You know, Snipe, your unrelenting optimism is what keeps this crew going. Hey, I call it like I see it, Snipe replied with a shrug. And what I see is a whole lot of potential for fiery death. Leela, who had been gazing out at the nebula with wide-eyed wonder, turned back to the group. Come on, guys, let's not ruin the moment. We actually did something good here. Yeah, Rylan agreed, a hint of sarcasm creeping into his tone. Let's take a moment to reflect on our newfound status as galactic peacemakers. Maybe they'll give us medals. Or a swift kick out an airlock, Jav countered, though there was a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The truth was, their little act of diplomacy might have just saved their necks, and possibly a few million others. The Space Cathedral, an ancient relic of a long-dead alien race, now stood as a beacon of peace. Well, assuming no one got the bright idea to start shooting again. The place had more defensive systems than a tax collector during bonus season, but they were about as reliable as a politician's promise. The nebula sure is something, though, Leela said, her gaze drifting back to the swirling colors outside. Hard to believe something so beautiful can exist in a universe as messed up as ours. Beauty in chaos, Lyra said with a wry smile. The universe's way of making us forget how much it hates us. If it didn't hate us, it wouldn't be nearly as fun, Rylan noted. Where's the thrill in predictable outcomes and safe spaces? And yet here we are, Jav pointed out, with a ship that's one sneeze away from falling apart and a crew held together by caffeine and sarcasm. Don't forget spite, Snipe added. That's a major component, Rylan grinned. Spite, caffeine, and sarcasm sounds like a recipe for success to me. Lyra raised an eyebrow, or a recipe for disaster. But hey, what's life without a little risk? The crew shared a laugh, their camaraderie as much a survival tool as any weapon or shield. It was this bond, frayed and patched as it was, that had seen them through countless scrapes, close calls, and questionable decisions. So, what's next, fearless leader? Leela asked, turning her attention back to Rylan. He leaned back, hands behind his head, and stared at the ceiling as if considering the weight of the universe. Well, we could always retire. Find a nice planet with minimal death traps, maybe start a farm. Yeah, right, Snipe deadpanned. Like any of us know the first thing about farming. Speak for yourself, Lyra chimed in. I once grew a pretty impressive crop of space potatoes. Space potatoes, Jav echoed. Is that what you're calling those pathetic shriveled things you found in the cargo bay? Hey, they were experimental, Lyra defended, though her grin suggested she wasn't taking the criticism too hard. Experimental or not, I think I'll stick to ship mechanics, Snipe said. Even if this ship's held together by hope and chewed gum, at least the gum's still holding, Rylan observed. Then more seriously, but really there's always another mission, another crisis. Maybe one where the universe doesn't try so hard to kill us. Fat chance, Jav said, shaking his head. But who knows? Maybe we've started something here. Yeah, like giving the galaxy a new target for their frustrations, Snipe quipped. Let him come, Lyra said, her voice full of the reckless bravado that made her such an invaluable part of the crew. We'll just keep improvising our way through. Rylan pushed himself to his feet, stretching out the kinks in his back with a groan. All right, enough sitting around reminiscing. Let's get ourselves patched up and see what other trouble we can get into. The crew nodded, the ease with which they fell back into routine a testament to their resilience. Life aboard the regretful decision might be a constant dance with death, but it was their dance, and they wouldn't trade it for anything. As they set to work, each member of the crew found themselves reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. It was a journey stacked with more losses than wins, but also one that had forged them into something more than just a group of disparate souls hurtling through the void. Maybe someday, Leela mused aloud, they'll write songs about us, the crew who turned a relic into a monument of peace. If they do, I hope they get my good side, Snipe said, ever the pessimist. And maybe gloss over the parts where we nearly died a dozen times. That's all part of the charm, Lyra said, winking. Who wants to hear about smooth sailing anyway? No one, Jav agreed. That's why even in a universe as vast as this, we still find ourselves at the center of it all. Rylan chuckled. That's the spirit, Jav. Let's keep it that way. The crew's banter continued, their laughter a balm against the harshness of the universe. It was in moments like these that they found hope, not in some cosmic miracle or divine intervention, but in each other. Perhaps that was the real lesson here, that in a galaxy bent on tearing itself apart, sometimes the only thing you could rely on was the person sitting next to you, griping about the cold coffee and dodgy wiring. "All right, crew," Ryland said, clapping his hands together as he looked around at his team, his family. "Let's set course for the next great disaster, shall we?" With a chorus of affirmations and a few grumbled complaints, the crew of the regretful decision set to their tasks with renewed purpose. What lay ahead was uncertain, but then, it always was, and that uncertainty was what made it all worth it. As the ship powered up, engines rumbling with a determination that belied their patchwork state, Ryland took one last look at the space cathedral, now a shining beacon against the dark backdrop of space. "Here's hoping they keep it together," he muttered to himself, before turning his back on the view. "We've got our own messes to fix." And with that, the regretful decision slipped back into the black, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of a crew who'd somehow managed to turn chaos into something resembling harmony. It wasn't perfect, and it sure as hell wasn't peaceful, but it was theirs. And in a universe teetering on the brink of madness, that was more than enough.